you?
Thank you, Dr. Praker. It's good to see everybody. Sorry I wasn't with you last time. I was double booked. I was doing the other good of the day, but I'm here with you today. Dr. Young told me how great you guys were. I know a few of you. I know a few of you only too well, as a matter of fact. And Sarah, we won't tell everybody how long we've known each other for sure. But it's good to see everybody. Lots of stuff we're going to do today, and we're just going to jump into it, but there's a couple of objectives that we have I want to read to you. I mean, the two main objectives today will be to build consensus on approach for discussions and recommendations of where we want to go. Now, it's important that we do understand this is a working group to do stuff. We're not just going to meet and talk. We're going to get stuff done. So it is important that we come to a consensus, and how consensus is arrived is that we all, not necessarily, Ben Bradstedter's heard this too many times, not necessarily an item we fully agree on, but items that we can live with. And this is the way we build that critical mass consensus. The second thing we're going to do is to identify early recommendations for supporting students' preparation on the path of post-secondary access and success. Some of the conversations you've heard going on nationally now is about we're moving to a success model. Well, in Kentucky, we moved to a success model a long time ago. But we're being explicit, and we're going to operationalize it, and we're going to put it into play. And so I do appreciate the conversation you had before, and I appreciate Lou leading that conversation since I wasn't there, but I'm going to turn it over to her now and let her tell us what else we need to do before we get fully started.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. And thanks all of you Brady Bunch faces for being with us again today. It's great to be back together. While our time together really will begin with Ryan from Education Strategies Group, he's going to do the heavy lifting today. As we look at some additional data for us to think about, I did want to quickly connect back to our last meeting. So one note, based on your all's feedback, we will propose to the Continuum to consider a separate work group with a focus on adult learners, as the strategies tend to be different. And we would like to target our efforts this year on the transition from high school to post-secondary in order to keep our tasks more manageable. So we will be asking the Continuum to have that offshoot group. I also wanted, you may have noticed in the Google resources folder, I'll ask Dr. Fraker if she'll post that over in the chat again so you have easy access to it. But in our Google resources folder, thank you so much, Jennifer, for that. Such a helpful resource. The draft goals and deliverables document was updated to include those 3 momentum milestones we talked about last time: preparing, applying, and enrolling. Dr. Ellis, Dr. Fraker, and Ryan did a great job putting those markers in as a way to organize our thinking and organize our meetings, including today and the next couple of meetings. So this is a living document. We'll keep coming back to it as we move forward to refine and shape it over the course of our next few meetings. But for now, I do want to ask us to think about these categories. Again, preparing, applying, and enrolling. These were the ones that Ryan labeled as post-secondary transition momentum metrics and collectively represent the most predictive indicators of post-secondary preparedness, retention, and success. So that's going to be the data dive that we engage in today. If you recall, we also agreed that these categories would serve as guideposts for our collective work. So with that, this is where Ryan comes in to do all of the hard work as we get started thinking about that first bucket, preparing. So I'll toss it to you, Ryan.
Thanks, Lou. And I think we had also, on the last one around enrolling, we wanted to make sure that it was also about persistence and success. So just making sure that we caught that note as well. So today, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just on some of the data across those buckets, because I think there was, at our last conversation, there was some interest in trying to go a step deeper and look at some of the Kentucky specific data and how it looks demographically as well as regionally. So we're going to show some of that, spend a little bit of time kind of engaging in a little bit of discussion around what do we see from that data? What questions arise for us? And then we'll shift into talking more explicitly just around that preparing bucket, with the hope that the next meeting we would focus on applying, and then the following meeting we would focus on that enrollment and success piece, just to put a little bit more guardrail around the conversations. So the latter half will be getting deeper into the preparing, but just wanted to frame that for everybody. So let me share my screen. Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna drop a link in the chat, which is gonna have the slides so that you can also follow along. And as we're having a conversation about the data, if you want to go back on your own and look at any particular elements, you're able to do that in real time. All right. Oops, wrong button. You think I would know how to do this now? All right. So just a reminder, and for anyone that wasn't here, again, as Lou said, this was sort of where we started the conversation, the kind of preparing bucket, the applying bucket, enrolling. I'm going to try to cover, to the extent that the data are available, a vision of some of what exists within Kentucky, and I'll call out a few places where there are not data, or their data may be coming shortly. So starting with, I wanted to start first with just where we have seen high school graduates end up in terms of their actual attainment. So this is looking directly at students that graduated in 2015, zooming forward to 2019, how successful they have been, and we'll want to do this as a frame for thinking about some of those preparation elements. So as you can see here, and sorry for the blurriness, I'm realizing now on big screen it gets blurred out a little bit, but in essence what you're seeing here is that 4 years later, you've got a few folks that have been able to get certificates, associates and bachelors, many still in college. Some have been able to, obviously graduate and have CTE. Those are likely industry recognized credentials. And then you do still have a large bucket, 32% of students who have not gone on to any additional training beyond high school. When you look at that based on this chart, looks at those same indicators and outcomes based on whether or not a student participated in any early post-secondary opportunities, you see some pretty stark contrasts. And I think this is, something that is not all too surprising, but important to look at. For those that participated in AP, IB, dual enrollment, CTE pathways, for instance, you're seeing much greater success outcomes, even in the short time of 4 years. And we know, obviously, 4 years is not going to capture everybody in terms of their ability to attain credential beyond high school. When you break that down even further and look specifically at the different options and opportunities that students are seeing and experiencing in high school, again, pretty clear that those that are able to participate in AP and dual enrollment are showing pretty high ability, even in 4 years, for engagement in college and ultimately movement into associates and bachelors and credentials as well. And similarly, CTE pathway completion, while slightly lower, still is significantly higher than those that were not able to participate. So that's just some initial framing in terms of the kind of historical perspective. And now I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about students today that are in the system. So first, just to frame up the proficiency measures, as we talked about, a key component of being successful in high school is coming into high school prepared. And you see that there are some large gaps in that preparation based on demographics and income, as well as students with disabilities. Pretty large, in fact, for the students with disabilities. This is for any student that is proficient or advanced, or proficient or above. And so you've got, coming in out of 8th grade, shy of 50% of students that are hitting that benchmark overall. When you look at it in 11th grade, those numbers are actually slightly lower. Again, pretty large gaps in performance between different demographic groups. And obviously that is a challenge for ensuring that students are prepared for ultimately moving into higher education and workforce training in successful ways. We talked a little bit about the high school GPA. So this is getting now deeper into the actual momentum metrics, as we've talked about. The state actually does have access to 9th grade GPA, but we needed a little bit more time to get that data. So this is just GPA of all high school graduates. So looking across their entire high school experience. Again, you're seeing actually 3.0 is a fairly good indicator overall, but you're seeing some pretty big differences there as well demographically. Now, if you look at this,
Ryan, I don't want to stop you there, yep. But I want to go back and just let the people know in Kentucky, we've run this data, and for Kentucky, 2.75 or 2.8 actually is the magic number for us on the GPA.
Yep. And that's helpful for entrance and success in higher education. Yeah. So that, Dr. Thompson, that's really helpful here for this map as we start to look at how this data plays out across particular communities within the state. So there are a fair number of communities that are still, as an average across all their students, fallen a little bit short of that number. Now, moving into the space around pathways, this chart's a little old. I think it's 2 years old now, but I think important to sort of consider. So the state has done, I would say, great work. You're one of the leading states around building high quality pathways in the nation, and have probably the most incredible data around that in the nation as well. And so you're able to map things in this way. Essentially, what you're looking at here is based on the high demand industry sectors that are defined at a state perspective, how many juniors and seniors are concentrating in those particular key pathways. And again, so you're seeing that those numbers, there are different areas of the state that are doing better than others, as you would expect. And so just important for framing where students are able to get into those pathways and where they're being successful in them as well. Moving into FAFSA completion, I think I showed you guys this last time or the time before, but these are the updated numbers. So Kentucky still year to year from last year is down about 6 points above national average, and continues to grow, which is a good sign, and closing that gap, which is a great sign. The challenge still remains the differentiation between students in Title I schools, students of color, and those that are not. The gap is pretty large, and seeing a 15 or 17% decrease from year over year is quite alarming, and something I know that the state and CPE has taken on and really has ramped up its efforts to try to close those gaps. Now moving into looking at sort of the college and career readiness aspects that we have seen, and as well as, sorry, the chart title, I don't know where that went. The one on the right is supposed to be in-state enrollment. I'm not sure how that disappeared. Apologies. So again, you're seeing on the left, the students that have been kind of designated as college and or career ready as captured in the state's accountability system, which would include AP, IB, dual enrollment, CTE pathway participation, industry recognized credentials. You've got, I think the average statewide was right around 60%. And yet the average of enrollment, which is the chart on the right-hand side, is slightly below that, but they're fairly well aligned. So I do think just this notion and recognition that students that are participating in these early advanced course opportunities are much more likely to then carry on into higher education. And so I just want to make sure that kind of connection is clear. So then looking at that, each of those in the sort of geographic way, again, you're seeing some big differentiation here, statewide and regionally. And you guys obviously know the Commonwealth much more than better than I do. Can probably point out some of the consistent challenges in certain areas. And this is what the college going rate looks like. So going back to, sorry, let me go back real quick. So the college readiness rate, you see some, deep dark blue in the middle of the state, as well as a couple in the western part of the state. That largely change. It doesn't largely change, but it does change when you start to look at the college going rate. So there's something that's happening between students being successful in high school and then ultimately moving on, that probably needs to be studied a little bit more and understood better. Now, lastly, here we go. I also wanted to show, just recognizing that as we think about the momentum metrics, getting into higher education, it's not just an enrollment piece, it's how well are you getting in and being ready to succeed. Also wanted to show first year credit hours accrued.
Hey, Ryan, could you go back to the last slide for just a second? Yep. Do you have any information in regard to college going rate and household incomes, family incomes? And personally, I've always thought there's a very direct correlation there. I still believe that because you've got some very high achieving counties on here. And that's where, from the previous slide, you see a drop down. Yeah. So do you have any information in regard to that component?
There is those data do exist. I don't have them in this particular slide, but I think in general you were right. So here, this is what you were pointing to. You've got high numbers of college and career readiness, or higher numbers of college career readiness.
Right.
Yet when you go to the college going rate, that rate drops down for certain communities.
Right.
Bob, there's a direct correlation in two particular areas here. One is that in school districts where you have a bigger local tax base, you're going to have more people being college and career ready, and you're going to have a higher college going rate, not that much higher, but you're going to have a higher college going rate, but you're going to have a much higher college success rate, right? You've got some places in Eastern Kentucky, as an example, where the college and career readiness isn't as high, but you have a higher college going rate, but you have a lower college success rate. So you're seeing a much more direct correlation with success, not around necessarily college going, but you do more around, in many cases, if they produce. We mainly use grades as a determinant here now, but those that are college ready. I hope that made sense.
Aaron, it does. And I think, Ryan, I think what we're all saying here is there was a new study that that came out that I saw in the last few days in regard to graduating seniors this year across the country and what factors were determining their next steps. 75% of them says it's totally finances. Totally.
Yep.
75% of them. Now, so there's some direct correlation here that I think in Kentucky, especially, we need to dive deeper into. And when students are saying that, that means parents are saying that, that means they're seeing and getting that from home. That means FAFSA rates are declining because of that. You know, we just don't either see the value, or we don't have the money, or it's out of my reach. And that's a communication issue, that it's not out of their reach for most of us. It's not out of our reach in helping these families and students. But I think that's an important component as you go forward, as we go forward, we should look at.
Yeah.
And Ryan, while we're at this juncture, there's some questions over in the chat before we go.
I just pulled those up. Yep.
All right.
All right. So I'm going to try to work through those one by one. So
Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah. How much of the some college are still enrolled in college, or who have attended full-time and left? So that number, that 2019 capture, just from a data perspective, was anybody that was either still enrolled or only had some college. That can be broken down even further, and the KY Stats has that data, so that's something we can follow up with. Carolyn, which pathways are considered high demand? Great question. So KDE and KCTCS and others have worked with the workforce folks to define demand, as well as kind of high skill, high wage, other considerations based on labor market projections. So there's actually a list that is used to define those pathways. There are, I think, 10 for that slide that I showed. That was based on the top 10 demand fields, not just singular occupations, but actual fields. And there's a
Ryan,
list.
can I interject something here, because that last point you made is important for all of us to understand. These are big macro fields that are high demand. What we're finding out is that we don't know how we're going to do this, Lou. I mean, I'm referring back to our KDE position here, or KBE position, but we've got to get more micro on these, especially as we think about how technology is driving some of these high demand fields. So the pathways may not be as solid or as complete as they need to be for 5 years down the road. And so we need to be thinking, and we obviously need to line this up with post-secondary, but some of these high demand fields are so broad that it's probably not getting us exactly where we're going when we think about the pathways. So we need to really think about that.
I just saw a pathway yesterday from a high school in Northern Kentucky, Aaron, that was beginning to be more granular. It was called supply chain. And post-pandemic, you can imagine how popular that is.
That's a great example, Lou, of exactly what I'm talking about. We need to be getting down to that granular level more, because that's where we're needing. Yeah, I know how hard that is to put in place. I get that. But those are the kinds of conversations I just want to let people know that we need to be thinking about when we talk about this alignment.
Yeah, that may, Jennifer and Amanda and our co-chairs, we may want to pull in Leslie Slaughter or someone else from KDE to come talk a little bit more explicitly about that in one of our upcoming meetings, just to note. And I saw one other question, which I think was related to the college ready rates, and I think probably gets to the same point around that families that have more access to either financial access or are previously have gone to college and are families that have that knowledge within their within their family are certainly better off in terms of helping their students understand how, whether it's gaming the system or being able to navigate it in a way that's potentially better than students at first generation. So I'm going to keep going, and then we're going to come back because there actually is some time for us to sort of think about what else we saw and wondered. I think I had one last one. So this was first year college credit hours earned. Again, looking at, this is based off of where students graduated their high school, not where they're actually going to post-secondary institution, just to be clear. So you're seeing, this will have some relation to the extent to which students were able to bring credit in with them in that first year. And then looking at first year GPA within college, recognizing that that also has incredible importance for ability to continue on and persist within higher education. So I wanted to pull out, and I've again given you the link. Would love if we could spend maybe, just checking my time, spend 3 or 4 minutes ourselves thinking about 2 big questions. What were some of the key things that you noticed, and what else do you wonder about? What else would you like to see and kind of be able to get deeper into, and then have a little bit of discussion around that. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for now, and everyone should have access, if you want, to those slides. And I'm just gonna stay quiet for 3 minutes, and then we'll come back together and have a little bit of discussion around what you wonder about and what else you noticed.
Hi, Ryan. Elizabeth Mays from Louisville. I guess my question would be, do we break it down and look at where kids are being successful from different regions of the state? Because I know, like I've worked with the Chattanooga Public Ed Foundation, and they use their data really well to kind of back map where kids have gone and been successful in a very specific way. And also kids might see more examples of themselves when they show up on these campuses if they're going where others have gone from their community.
So is that a question to me or to the group? So yes to Chattanooga, yes to the great work they're doing there. And I think my just reaction to that is, I do think it needs to be localized in some ways. And yet I think that the state has an important role to play in coordinating and quarterbacking some of that from time to time, both in terms of, and I think what this group is trying to ultimately get at is 3 things: policy moves, sort of capacity or initiatives at a statewide perspective, and then the communication support to be able to engage families, communities, individuals within school and out of school. So I think the extent to which this work group, or my understanding of this work group, is really to sort of signal where we think the state and the Commonwealth can make that level of support so that the work can happen locally.
Elizabeth, to add more to it, the student success literature we've been doing for a long time shows that if you can somehow get that first entry in a safe environment, now I want to be careful in my argument here, I'll come back, but if we can get that first entry into a safe environment, there's a much greater chance that that student will succeed. In other words, that's why we're doing our bridge programming now at the most localized level we possibly can, is to get them engaged in that first level college experience. So your point is clear. And somehow we need a bigger, what I call localized base of growing from within the community. And that's, ultimately why many community colleges were created, to facilitate that move. We've moved more toward thinking of them as a technical outlet, which is good. But that's one. Now, the carefulness of it, when we see students that are far more apt to be trained for a global economy, is when they move to a more diverse setting. So similarity may breed familiarity to some degree. It doesn't necessarily breed what we call those long-term employability outcomes that we want. So, but somehow we've got to figure out how to get them engaged, to want to get more engaged, to spread their wings in a more heterogeneous I'll get it out sooner or later way. So hopefully that made sense.
To Dr. Thompson's point, Ryan, I'd love to see if you all could create a map that sort of overlays these rates with the location of post-secondary institutions. I think when you look at the gap between like those college readiness rates in counties like Martin County, right, or Owsley County, where you see really high CCR rates, and then that next slide shows that they are not going to college and not achieving a high GPA. I'm just curious how you would correlate not only access to physical institutions, but like broadband connectivity to go to those maybe other post-secondary options that are not physical.
Well, you'll be happy to hear we actually have that. KCTCS and others have been working on that very map behind the scenes. I don't know when it's actually going to be public, but we can certainly share it with this group in short order.
Just made my day. Thanks, Ryan.
Can I say something real quick of the comparison of the CCR map and just doing a quick count of the college going rate? 18 of the deeper blue for the CCR, you see a significant drop in the college rate. So are we looking at those districts mainly focusing on the career pathway to meet that standard for state assessment or for state identification? And again, going back to what Stephanie mentioned, access, income, there's a lot of questions in there, but that's very interesting to see that they're meeting the standard from a state level, from a Board of Education point. But then when we look at secondary, we see that major decline. That's some interesting data there.
Barry, I'm going to have to agree with you. I attended a presentation once and it was really interesting. And I won't give the specifics of the presentation, but I will say the person was a former principal and was a principal in more than one, various districts throughout the state. And he talked about how different districts interpret some of these standards differently. If you understand what I'm saying, like one district may have one interpretation of the standard or how the student meets the standard, and then another district may have another. So that may have something to do with it.
I think one more thing that would be interesting is to see of the CCR map, how many of those that are in the deeper blue have CTE schools within their school district or strong CTE programs, career and technical ed programs that allow them to be higher on the career side, but maybe not the college side. I think that would be interesting.
Barry, we have that data. There's a couple points you're making here, whether you know you're making it or not. I'll help you to make it. And this is the issue that we've had for a while. Some of the graduation requirements necessarily did not align with post-secondary requirements. And that has created really that disconnect, if you will. I mean, that's what this group is here for, to be honest with you. That's that disconnect. So when sometimes K-12 said they were ready post-secondary, saying, well, no, you're not. And that has created a problem. Now, the college and career, the career readiness or the technical readiness, in many cases, many of these folks align with our KCTCS campuses, and they move quickly into jobs or quick certificates. So it's kind of hard to compare apples and oranges too. And I want to just make sure that we understand that when we're talking about a 2-year transfer degree or a 4-year baccalaureate degree, you're going to see a significant difference in that map, what it's telling us, versus those that may have an ATC that works with our KCTCS technical folks to move people into a quick certificate and move on. So a lot of the questions, that one question you brought up has many answers, based on how you parse out those questions, if that makes sense.
And I think on the P12 side, thinking about what Barry and Mary observed is an example of the perversions that happen when high schools are trying to hit the metric and lose sight of the goal. So if we're trying to get the CCR numbers up, then we can have kids do certain things that may, and I don't mean to say at all that I think folks intentionally go out to do this, but folks refer to it as gaming the assessment system. But when we do that and we aren't sensitive to meeting the needs of the child and his or her goals, then that disconnect is automatically going to happen. So we, dirty little secret maybe, but we do need to uncover that and think about how we can rectify that moving forward.
I think it also could speak to the fact that, you know, incentive structures are focused on getting things done within the high school system without thinking also about the incentive of moving to the next piece. So just to,
I want to throw this in. I know we're putting you behind, Ryan, but that's okay. We'll be okay, I promise. But that's the difference in thinking about high school, ending high school as the ultimate goal. I mean, versus Lou's point, I think is exactly the point. If we're thinking about ending high school as the ultimate goal, then you're going to have a lot of more games playing going on. And that becomes then a false way of thinking about building an educated workforce in this state. Or, I mean, if you don't believe me, look at the data of those that were on unemployment during this pandemic. So if you had college success, any kind of college success, a 2-year certificate, if we had those as an ultimate end result, then you would have a different kind of way of thinking about assessment, different kind of way of thinking about measurement, and from the standpoint of what's important toward the end goal. So these are the sorts of policy related items that I think that Ryan was pointing out that we need to be thinking about.
I'll throw this bomb into the room and continue on, but just to the point of something that the incentive structure, something we've been watching is about 2 years ago, Texas put in place, they changed their entire K-12 funding system, but one of the big things they did was include an outcomes funding component for districts based on whether students moved on after high school. So whether they enrolled, whether they moved into a technical training program or enlisted in the military. And they're just now seeing those dollars flow to districts over the past year, and it has changed some of the movement. Not saying that's something Kentucky wants to do, but just to the point of trying to recognize that where the incentives lie do matter at the end of the day.
Ryan, I bet affluent districts are doing quite well with that model.
Well, so the way they structured it smartly was that they made it only on the growth, and they gave extra money for students, for helping students of color, low-income students, special education students, and being able to get there. So yes, that's the big challenge, is how do you make sure that it's not just continuing to reward the winners? And they did make some smart choices around that, but still at the end of the day, it is going to help on the upside for sure.
It sounds like our performance funding model, by the way, Ryan, just to let you know.
Yep, that's exactly right. All right, well, there are a lot of great questions in the chat as well, which I've been writing down. I'm not sure we have time to get through all of them, but just want to give maybe another minute or two for anyone else to sort of raise any key things that they saw that you don't feel like we've had addressed as of yet that you want to bring up. And I will be able, Samantha and Carolyn, Sean, some of those elements I've got in my notes for things that we can follow up with in terms of additional data.
So Ryan, I actually emailed Dr. Fraker, Dr. Ellis about this earlier. I think I included you on that. I was in some conversations with UK enrollment folks this past week, and it occurred to me that we're not doing in Kentucky what we used to do, which was an October follow-up on where Sophie Farmer is in October after her graduation. And so I'm wondering what we know about kiddos who either take or fall into a gap year 1 year later. It's still prime opportunity to attract those kiddos into a post-secondary program. But what do we know about them? How do we reach them? I bet Sherry Satterley knows where hers are, but do we? I don't know.
Lou, if I could, we still do that.
Oh, okay.
It's just really haphazard at this point.
Okay.
Like, it's not October anymore. 1 year it might be February, 1 year it might be October.
Oh.
And then with this year, it's been very, it's becoming less of a priority, I feel like, anyways.
And I had lost track of it, Sherry, so I'm so glad you let me know
I
what's
know
going
we
on.
did it this year. I'm not sure if it's still required or recommended, but we still did it. But like, you're right. I don't think the emphasis is put on it like it was when I was a guidance counselor.
Yeah.
And I think if we want to put more emphasis on that, which I think we should, I feel like it's not just you have to do this and you have to do this by a certain date. I think we have to be pretty prescriptive about who's doing the checking, because oftentimes that's something that gets pushed to somebody who maybe isn't the person who you or I think should be making those phone calls. But
well, and Barry mentions that the yo-yo report for students with disabilities still happens. So that's there are mechanisms for doing that. And I know we used to fuss about it when I was a high school person, but it's really important. I don't know. I have no idea what the numbers are, Ryan. So I guess that's the first data question. But that's a batch of young folks that we don't want to lose in our transition considerations.
You know,
Absolutely.
Lou, your point though is a transition point, and this is where, way back in my day when I was VP for enrollment management a million years or so ago, we worked with the high schools that provided us with our bigger feeders. And we used to, I mean, back in those days, it was archaic, but we get those names and we follow up and send them out stuff. We worked that closely with them. Now we've got a big technology system. We should be able to do that better with. We're not. What I can tell you that nationally and what we've done is that when you look at those, by the way, we need to redefine a gap year. Gap year usually only happens for rich folk, or for people that can afford it. Let's be clear. Those that stick out a year that falls into the working class or the lower socioeconomic class, they don't go back. There's no such thing as a gap year.
Well, in the fall of
those are adult
2020,
learners.
the fall of 2020 had to spike. Despite test optional and all of that stuff, the reports that we're hearing, there's a whole bunch of kids that didn't go anywhere last fall.
Yeah, it's something like close to, well, we know that 50.5% went to college from Kentucky last year. So we know we got 49.5% that didn't.
Yeah.
But many of those are, many taking a gap year can afford it and go on, but really, and so we don't really, I'm not going to say we don't need to worry about them. We probably do, but they're going to go someplace. Those that we need to worry about are those that really, once they sit out a year, it's like,
it's a vortex.
So we need not to lose them, right? That's the issue.
And I'll put a plug in here for, we're going to talk a little bit on the next side on the applying and enrolling, but we know traditionally summer melt is a huge issue, right? We've 20-30% of students who say they're going somewhere don't actually end up showing up anywhere. And I think there's an element there around getting better and more accurate information about what students are planning to do, right? And the surveys and the other ways to do that, but then also what's the sort of strategy in that in between summer space for ensuring that there are capacity and support for those students so that we don't lose track of them. All right, well, in honoring our time a little bit, I'm gonna move us forward on the agenda. Again, here we're gonna start to narrow down a little bit and focus more directly on that preparation side. Last time we talked a little bit about recognizing the 8th to 9th grade transition as a key element, some of the early career exploration aspects, and then also thinking more deliberately about how to get students early on prepared for and moving in the right way towards some of that advanced coursework, even if it's not directly happening in ninth grade. So I'm going to share a little bit of data and research background, just very short snippets, but certainly we can go deeper on any of this as it makes sense. So do this again. All right. So starting first with the transition from middle school, we talked a little bit about kind of the importance of early warning indicators and just confirming that the research is pretty significant and consistent here. Students that are on track in ninth grade are 4 times more likely to graduate and almost, I think, over 3 times more likely to move into higher education. And we've seen in a number of different communities, starting in Chicago and spinning out in multiple other places, examples of systems that begin to track and sort of weekly monitor students that are flagging. And that is largely because of this. So here we are, 3 times more likely to graduate high school. Students that have above a 3.0 GPA are much more significantly likely to move into higher education. Your GPA in ninth grade is fairly predictive of what your GPA at the end of your high school graduation is. And so it's really important that students come into high school ready to succeed, and that ninth grade year becomes a target of support. So just a touch more on what we know in terms of kind of 8th grade and that transition into ninth grade. So if students come into ninth grade behind, it is very difficult for them to make up ground. So every course failed in 8th grade increases the odds that they won't ultimately make it to 10th grade by 16%. And while we know test scores are good predictors, in fact, attendance and course failure is even more important, which I'll show here. So this is from some research that they did in Chicago, looking at students' GPA and their attendance and how many of them were on track or off track by the end of ninth grade. So what you see here is that if you have low attendance, very likely, even if you have high GPA, there's still a fair number of students that are not on track. Similarly, even if you have high attendance and low GPA, fair number of students that are not on track. So that combination of 2 factors is really critical for ensuring that students get off on the right foot. Just also wanted to recognize that there is still an element beyond just the attendance and the course piece, which is the early awareness and beginning to create graduation plans and understand the extent to which students have that sort of vision for the future, which starts to get connected to their thinking about the courses that they are able to take and the experiences. And I'll talk a bit around the kind of career exploration elements. So again, just framing here, we've already seen this in the data previously, but on the left, you have national numbers. On the right, these are Kentucky numbers about how important it is for when students take early post-secondary options. They are much more likely across the board, across demographics, to ultimately enroll in post-secondary. There we go. All right. Sorry for the amount of words on this, but important study came out a couple years back that basically said students that get into advanced courses are significantly more likely to graduate, move on to higher education, earn credits, and that is similar across subjects. And for students of color and low-income students, as soon as they have access to those courses, the differences in outcomes fade away in general. And so really thinking about how to open up the door to more of those opportunities. And we know there's a whole work group focused directly on that, but given that this is, we're really trying to think about the full spectrum, I wanted to make sure that we hit on that. Two just state level examples that we've shared with the other group, but I want to frame here as well. And that is the sort of ways in which there is early identification and early placement into those sorts of advanced courses. In Connecticut, they've created a activation campaign where they use the College Board Advanced Placement Potential Score, which is available for any students that have taken the PSAT. And it looks at kind of their likelihood of being successful in a future AP course. And they send a letter to every 10th and 11th grade student, letting them know that they have potential, that they should request to be in these courses, that they can succeed, and here are the benefits for doing so. And they've done that for the last 4 or 5 years now. And over those 5 years, they've shown some of the highest growth nationally in not only participation, but also success, and particularly among Black, Hispanic, and low-income students. On the flip side, you have a policy in Washington whereby this started as a local policy and has become a statewide policy, whereby students are automatically enrolled in the next highest course, or the next most rigorous course. So it takes the enrollment questions out of the hands of parents, family, counselors, et cetera, and makes it an automatic reason to get there. Yes.
Ryan, I can't resist to tell a bit of a story, and that is when I was superintendent in Jessamine, one of my high schools was looking at their data, and very small population of kids of color, but they saw that their kids of color had literally never scored proficient on a state assessment. And the principal at the time took every child of color at her high school and ramped them up to the next highest level course, whatever that was. And we saw immediate dividends, but just by that one act on the part of the principal.
Yeah.
Lou, I appreciate you saying that. I have to make 3 quick points, Ryan. I'm sorry. I don't want to leave Kentucky.
I opened the door. Sorry, Ryan.
You do, but I want people to know what's going on in Kentucky specifically too. And you may be getting to that, Ryan, but we just did our dual credit work, our assessment. We found out that those students of color that took dual credit were more successful in college by comparison than any other group. You didn't say that on the last slide, Ryan. You probably were going there and I didn't give you a chance. I'm sorry. But I wanted people to know that that's what's happening in Kentucky. You know, also, when we see students taking advanced placement, as we have with, oh Lord have mercy, I forgot the name of the group, but we help fund. Anyway, when you're focusing on them, they have a much greater outcome too. So Lou's point is absolutely on target. When we got rid of developmental education in Kentucky, we saw where our underrepresented, all people, but are underrepresented and low income were failing at a higher rate by comparison than their white counterparts and their middle-class counterparts. When we went to a co-requisite model, they were having bigger successes. So this is truly about some of these things that you're talking about here, but these are very Kentucky specific items that I'm using as examples for us as we talk about this.
Yeah, that's great. And I think the point I'm trying to make here is I know the other group is going to be focused on ways to better inform and open up access, but it's really important to think about access not as a 11th or 12th grade solution. You got to start earlier to make sure that students have the ability to actually access those courses later on in high school. And that starts in middle school and 9th grade in the transition. So it's critical to think about ways to do that. Just a bit on career exploration. We can go much further here, and I do think it would be helpful to have someone from KDE come and talk a little bit more about this. But similarly, we see students that participate in CTE much more likely to graduate, enroll, and ultimately find better access to jobs and compensation. What we are increasingly seeing is this desire to start the advisement process earlier. So this is based on some survey information from state level CTE directors of kind of when they begin a lot of that support and advisement. And you can see some of it's happening in elementary, but really middle school is where it starts to ramp up. And yet there are still definitely gaps and opportunities for beginning to get students more aware of their opportunities into the future. They also asked of those strategies that are being offered, what are being kind of most effective? The things that are most effective in terms of certifications and having individuals that are particularly focused on advising, those are the things that are happening in the fewest places. So it is a little bit of a quandary in terms of how do we get more access to advisement and more directed support for students earlier on, recognizing that there are obviously constraints. So the Advanced CTE and ASCA, the Counselors Association, put forward a couple suggested recommendations for how to do that, focused on professional development, really thinking about advising as more than just a school-based effort, opportunities for secondary and post-secondary systems for collaborating, and then really the importance of having a cohesive strategy around career exploration and access for all students. Again, with something that Kentucky has been a leader on for a number of years, and I certainly think there are ways to continue to leverage that. So now want to just, we're going to be moving into our breakouts for a discussion. Specifically in the preparation space, in that thinking about the middle school to high school transition, thinking about ways to get students early on engaged with their sort of vision for their future, thinking about how to get them set up to be successful and be able to access those courses and opportunities that we know are good predictors of long-term opportunity. Would love to spend some time. We're going to break out. Lou's going to take one group, Aaron's going to take another group, and talk specifically around what you see as the biggest challenges in that preparation space, and then opportunities where we hopefully will spend most of our time as we start to really drill into what are those suggestions and things that this work group can put forward as a series of recommendations. I would, before we break, just want to sort of remind folks again of something I said earlier. At the end of the day, we're thinking about the recommendations in sort of three different buckets. There's the more formal sort of policy type changes that may need to come about, some of which you guys were talking about earlier in terms of alignment of expectations for what students are doing as they leave high school and what colleges are expecting of them. Others can be more initiative focused or capacity focused. How do we get more counselors or advisors in the communities that need them? The third would be around communications. What needs to happen at a statewide level, or what communications need to be provided locally to better support and engage with students and families and others in the system. So with that, I think we're going to go into breakouts now. And each of the breakouts will have a document where Jennifer and Amanda are going to be taking notes in the conversation, and I'm going to be jumping back and forth between the breakouts as well in case there are other questions or I can provide additional assistance.
Okay, guys, be patient as you pop into the breakout rooms, and I'll make sure that everybody is assigned, and then we'll get started.
And then maybe the message there is we should all work on continuing to figure out ways that our kids can get better grades in high schools, not lowering the standards, not watering down, not inflating the grades. But if we know that high school grades matter, then how do we help every kid in high school get better grades? Not meet the college career readiness metrics on the state test, but how do we help them get better grades? Improving their attendance, more rigorous coursework, all of those relevance, belonging, all the things we know about doing well in high school should then apply. Sorry, soapbox. I'm Erin Thompson, channeling my inner Erin Thompson. Sorry.
I'm gonna jump on your soapbox with you, Dr. Thompson. Dr. Young. I think to your point, one story I always tell is I know a young lady in Martin County, Kentucky, who really brilliant young lady, worked really hard in high school, graduated as the valedictorian of her class with a 4.0 GPA and got a 17 on the ACT. Right. So there's that correlation of like, there's not a constellation of supports around students that really help them understand what matters in high school. Right. She had great attendance, worked really hard, but she didn't have, to your point, that advanced coursework. So even though she did really well in her high school classes and she had great teachers, the systems in Kentucky didn't incentivize her performance to get scholarships or to do well at a post-secondary institution.
Out of post-secondary, or how did she do in post-secondary?
She made it through, but she didn't get any scholarships. And that's what her family was counting on, was you have this great GPA. How are you're going to get a full ride to Moorhead, and she didn't get any money from Moorhead. Yeah. And she's a teacher now herself, which is great. She's a great teacher in Harlan County, Kentucky. But I just think how much now she's burdened with this debt because she was told that one thing was incentivized when it wasn't in reality. So yeah. I think the other thing I would just add on is there's no component in any of our CCR metrics around like social emotional readiness or mental health. And when we look at like the real reasons kids tend to, and Sarah knows this well from PFE, most of our kids in Eastern Kentucky don't drop out because of academic readiness. They drop out because they're not culturally ready to be 2 hours away from their family, because they feel they're in a huge environment that they don't know how to navigate. So it's like, there's no component right now that we measure or assess in terms of like, do you have, and I see Sophie nodding, so that makes me feel good, Sophie, since you're the closest to the ground. I just think that's the hardest part of college in most cases.
I will say, and this is Sarah, back to Dr. Young's question about how did she fare at the university. We've sent 2 students that I can think of who graduated valedictorian or with honors from their high school. I don't even know what the GPAs were in those, or excuse me, what the GPAs or ACTs were in those scores, but when they got there, they flunked out the first semester. And we think about the mental model that sends back to that community. If this student who was valedictorian that year couldn't do it, who am I to think that I can do it? So there's a lot wrapped up in, I hesitate because I'm not an educator, so I hesitate to say inflated GPAs, but GPAs or awards that don't then move over to performance when they get to the college level. And I thought Ryan's slides earlier about the scores that you make at certain pivot points in your high school career are true indicators of what your first semester GPA does. ACT has that research from maybe 10 years ago, but if you're not on track at 9th grade, whatever your score in your courses in high school, that is your probably threshold of your highest score for college. And I don't know where that fits into one of the 3 buckets, maybe capacity or communication, but I do think it's a huge concern.
Well, I do also want to capture a more macro notion from you and Stephanie this morning, Sarah, and that is around specific concerns and strategies for Appalachian Kentucky. And I don't want to oversell or stereotype the notion of above your raising, but when I hear you say that an Eastern Kentucky high school valedictorian flunks out, that message screams across the mountains. And so that just normalizes that whole stereotypical experience. We've had conversations at UK about the microaggressions and biases that mountain kids experience when they come to town because of their accents. So I don't think that's a planning, question. I think it's a different bucket, but it is one that I think we have to grapple with, but based on real data, not stereotyping, poor mountain families. That's not what I'm after. I want to be sensitive to that conversation, but culturally it's an important question.
Well, and in this situation, I think I could underscore that the daughter was she was the daughter of a Gear Up counselor at the time. So it was somebody who was doing the work. It was a very small high school, and it could have been an anomaly, but I don't think it was. I think she went to Moorhead as valedictorian of that high school, feeling prepared, and just could not, that her previous work just did not set her up for success, her previous accolades.
And I have to add that post-secondary faculty hear that message. And every time we discuss GPA as college readiness and placement with faculty, we hear from them the anecdotal stories of the high school valedictorians that landed in all their developmental coursework. And that's frustrating to hear over and over from faculty when we have so much data that tells us differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Sean. At risk of sounding like a one-trick pony, listening to y'all talk about that, I'm going to come back to something I'm pretty sure I mentioned last month. That may be something that we could figure out ways to adapt, and that's this organization called the Posse Foundation. That their mission is to find really strong students in urban communities. They tend to be students of color, but that's not a requirement. And they put them in groups of 10 students, give them a year's worth of training, I guess, sort of counseling sessions, how to succeed in college, study skills, all kinds of stuff. And then they send them en masse, so 10 at a time, to the same college, right? And it's based on the founder's research. She got a MacArthur grant where she basically anecdotally talked to a kid, a black kid she knew who had gone to Harvard on a full ride and left Harvard, not because he wasn't doing particularly well academically, although he was struggling. And his comment to her was, I could have made it if my posse had gone with me, right? And so that's where the name of the foundation came from. And I know it's not a practical matter to say we're going to take 10 kids from Martin County and send them all to the same school together, right? But I wonder if there's some things we could do, maybe starting as early as middle school, to create some communities of these kids who then could help support each other as they move forward. And that may be as much as the universities agreeing, okay, we're going to create these groups of students when they get here. Maybe there's some ways that technology could allow those groups that start off together, even though they're in different schools, as they move on. But I just think there's some interesting work that's already been done in other groups that we may be able to figure out how to apply here.
Excellent. And I think, and we want to capture that one under opportunities too. So I haven't not been paying attention to time. Feel free to bleed over into opportunities, or we can continue to admire our problem under barriers. Let's just use the rest of our time with whatever's heavy on your all's minds and hearts right now.
And just as a matter of monitoring our time, we do have about 10 more minutes.
Okay.
Left.
All right. So we're in a good spot.
Again, this is Sarah, and I think for me, when you said heavy on your heart, Dr. Young, that's what prompted me with my next comment. And I believe it's either a challenge or an opportunity, I don't know, but it is something that, can't remember the gentleman's name, but he brought up when we were in the larger group around our parent work. And I think it fits again into that Appalachian model. And we at PFB have been doing, we've been doing Gear Up since 2005, but in 2011, we started collecting some data that now is longitudinal. And one of the things that we did in our Gear Up program is we were required to do parent surveys. And so we've got some longitudinal data in our parent surveys. And there were two, we studied this yesterday. It's one of the reasons it's top of mind for me. And it's in interviewing or doing the surveys with the parents at the 8th grade level, they're 78, 87%, my child will go to college. And then the very next question is, have you talked to your child about going to college? That was pretty high too. Third question was, has anyone talked to you about sending your child to college? And it's a reverse, 15% most. So I think that we're missing, we're facing a challenge with that. And we're also missing an opportunity. We've said for years, we have to demystify. I don't think that's the right word anymore, but it's experience for our parents. they've got the aspiration, and that doesn't change. We do surveys at the 8th grade, the 10th grade, and then at the beginning of their 12th grade year. Their aspirations for their children stay high, but then they do get bogged down in questions around, do you know how you might pay for this? Not as, it doesn't go as crazy as you think it will. I believe they think they could find the money to pay for it, but they just don't have the preparation through folks counseling and working with them. So I just feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't put that. I know we don't have time to even unpack it today, but it does matter.
Yeah, and interesting that question was posed to 8th grade parents. That's right. That's the spot where we're trying to.
Well, and that's the beginning.
Yeah, we're picking, yeah.
7th grade. And so, it's a really good time so we asked them at that 8th grade, but you're right. It's rich data for those, to know what a middle school parent is thinking. All
right, so I want to make sure Sophie and Samantha and Sarah have a chance to weigh in on this. So Sophie, I'm going to put you right on the spot. When you hear us talking about these early exposure and experiences to 8th grade, and you think about your own peers, especially at Danville before you went on to Gatton, what has today's conversation conjured up for you?
I think what I have seen is a lot of, and this isn't for every county and it's not for every student, but a lot of students who are able to access those opportunities and schools where they're told you're going to go to college and you're going to do really well are students who are already going to do well. They already have parents at home who have gone to college. It's not like we're not in my AP classes and stuff like that. It was almost always students whose parents had gone to college or had the resources to help them get to college already. And so I think if we were able to start getting students into, especially like it was an issue of students couldn't get into advanced classes if they didn't start out in advanced classes. And that tracking started really early on.
Yep.
And so if it was a lot easier for students to take advanced classes and also not take advanced classes across the board, because there were several times where I had peers who were like, I'm not ready to take advanced English, but I have to because I'm taking advanced classes and everything else. Yeah. And so I think if it was a lot easier for students to kind of move in and out of advanced classes depending on where they were in different areas, then students would feel a lot more comfortable with that and not feel like they're being put in a box of I am successful and I am not successful. And then it also created that imposter syndrome in students who were in these advanced classes who felt like they weren't ready to be in that advanced class and that they were told this is the pathway that you're going to follow and they weren't ready for it. And then students who couldn't access that, who felt like it wasn't available at all to them.
Very helpful, very, very helpful. And I saw the same thing when I was still in high schools in P12, Sophie, and we used to call them success marker courses. But if you get in orchestra, then you're going to follow, or if you get into Spanish 2 or French 2 before 9th grade or Algebra 1, then you're in that herd that's going to, and schools can do everything they want to lessen the gatekeeping of those courses, but you're either in the herd or you're not in the herd, and schools can't even change it. So if you're that girl who says, I'm really, really good at English and social studies, but if I don't take AP calculus and bio, I'm out of my herd. And then she's an imposter. So, and then the reverse happens. I may be really, really good at math and science, but I didn't get into the right honors track in teams or English or social studies or whatever. And so I'm not in the herd. All right, Samantha. Thank you, Sophie. Samantha, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I had a couple thoughts, actually. I know one that I think we all kind of already know, but especially a barrier, I think, is understanding and navigating financial aid. There's so many resources available to people. I think especially here locally in the Green River area district, we have our local career center that has youth worker funding for students 18 to 24 if you haven't worked at that point in your life, you know, you can get free education, you can get up to 500 hours of an internship that they're going to pay for. And they struggle so hard to find students to take advantage of that opportunity because people just don't know about it. And then I think another barrier that could also be a pivot point for an opportunity, I think, you know, I was in high school not that long ago, and I think it's true for a lot of people. You hear it especially like online. You know, students don't learn a lot about career opportunities in college. And they're like, I've went to school for like 12 years. I don't understand all the different opportunities that are available to me. What are these actual high demand careers? Like, I know what I'm interested in, but maybe that's not necessarily what I should pursue in college. And I think, you know, any kind of way, you know, like revolutionizing maybe career fairs or college fairs at the high school and middle school level and introducing these ideas to people early, like this is realistically what you can make. This is what you would need. There's short-term opportunities, there's longer-term opportunities, and none of them are better or worse than others. And I think finding that way to really let students know that would really change the game for a lot of people being filled more prepared.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Sarah, leaning on you. Sarah Ox.
This is going to, in some ways, sound like a pretty significant oversimplification. And in no way do I want to sort of minimize the work of our counselors in schools. But I'm hearing a lot about the power of messaging sort of within community and the impact that can have. So I wonder if there's opportunity to partner with volunteers or with college students to come in and fill that counselor role. So right, we have parents that come in and do book club and all these other wonderful things. Can they be trained in sort of a specific small subskill part to just provide greater capacity for doing that more frequently in some of our schools that need that? But it sounds like maybe they already exist.
I think in some places maybe they do, but I saw something on one of Ryan's slides that I captured for my own notes with the work that we do with dual credit in high schools. And that's this idea of post-secondary success teams that have higher ed and high school team members. So it's not just the high school getting them ready for something or the post-secondary folks receiving them, but instead there's that baton passing kind of consideration so that, and I don't know, I would imagine that the high school would be the place for it, the locus for it. And the high school then ensures that they have some of these higher ed partners. And I think the idea that they could be higher ed students from the community, students of color, students of disadvantaged backgrounds, socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, students with disabilities, whatever it looks like, to have those students' voices on that team sounds really smart to me.
And with technology now, it seems like you could, that our group or someone could sort of package modules around that, right? Like it wouldn't require ongoing resources to train or prepare people to have some of those conversations. Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna sort of what Sarah was saying, the other Sarah was saying in the chat, that there are a number of opportunities where, you know, near peer stuff. The one that we know about in Texas, they've taken community college students are paid as part of their like work study, essentially, to be local counselors, to go back to their local high schools. They're not actual counselors, right? But to be essentially mentors and peer engagement for just kind of telling the story of how they got there, what they're struggling with, giving another opportunity for connection. So I definitely think there's ways to actually use the structures that already exist within higher ed to allow those students to do that.
You got some snaps from
Sarah
Sophie.
mentioned in the chat too about AmeriCorps, utilizing AmeriCorps for that. It's a really easy thing to utilize, and it's minimal in cost at the district level because it's a matching thing. We utilize that right now for what we call a college and career transition coach. And they're there every day, and they have they have to set with a set group of students. I think it's 25 or below that they are focused on.
Excellent. Okay, we got the 2-minute warning. Let's just do some speed dating. If I call your name and there's anything you want Jennifer to capture on the barriers or opportunities list, this is a shot to do that. And then I'll spend 30 seconds recapping what I think our notes are from today. So Samantha, you're at my top left on my screen. Popcorn to you.
I think my main thing is definitely like educating more on financial aid opportunities and resources in the community, as well as, you know, career pathways for students.
Yeah, let's go with Sarah's notion that we've got to demystify the whole thing. Sarah Ox.
All good.
Shauna.
I keep thinking about much of our public assistance programming and our work subsidy programs. And I'm anticipating that there may be another huge work subsidy program coming to states via a package. And those are never tied to education and training or an opportunity to place these subsidized work placements, you know, in their career path or program of study, and I think that's always a huge missed opportunity. I mean, we're guilty of it in post-secondary, and that our work study program is not necessarily career path connected. We do more of that using TANF funds in the KCTCS system, where we fund TANF funded work study for low income families. So I guess my thought is, if we could have policy and do a better job of connecting public assistance programming and work subsidy programming to career paths that include some education and training.
Excellent. Thank you. Sophie.
I think I'm good.
All right. Thank you. And Stephanie.
There's so many great things happening across the Commonwealth, and I just keep thinking that we need to use this council and a work group to think about, like, how do we convene all of it towards like a time-bound impact goal so that we don't have all these little pockets of things happening. So that's just something that's top of mind for me.
I think coherence has to be the theme for the day here. Sarah White.
I'm good.
Right. Thank you, Sean.
I just say real quick, keep thinking about the woman from Martin County that y'all talked about. We need some kind of big counter move, public relations thing, kind of a you can do it sort of a thing, right? Because I think what struck me about that is that now she's back in the community, right? So people are reminded every day about that. Whereas, you know, if she had been successful, there's a pretty good chance she wouldn't have gone back to Martin County, right? If she had stayed at UK.
The apocalypse will feel like. Sean, I'm so sorry. We all got swept away.
All right, hey, Lou, you said that just when I popped in. I thought you were talking about me for a second.
I don't know if we were swept up or left behind, but that's got to be what it feels like.
All right, so I think the next 15, 20 minutes was to try to share a little bit about some of the key themes and big issues that were put on the table in both groups. I was able to spend a little bit of time in both, and I heard some similar stuff, but I'll defer maybe to each of the groups. Lou, I don't know if you want to frame up, or Jennifer, if you were taking notes, kind of some of the key elements that you guys discussed, and maybe Aaron or Amanda can do the same, and then we can talk about where there may be some overlap.
Sure, I'm happy to hit on just some big themes for in the barriers column and in the opportunities column from our side. That notion about GPAs matter really needs to just marinate. We need to get word out about that. The reason I have it listed in the barriers, not the opportunities column, is that a couple folks pointed out that you have examples of when the GPA trumps the ACT, but we also have some examples when they get to higher ed and those high GPA kids, even valedictorians, aren't successful, and then that taints the pool from the perspective of higher ed faculty. So really kind of grappling with that and getting information and data out around that. We also wrestled with the fact that I like how Shauna put it, and that is that there's this dramatic misalignment between P12 and post-secondary when it comes to all things college and career readiness. So the one thing we also pointed out as I'm not sure it's a barrier. I think it's frankly just absent. And that is the notion that social emotional readiness is not part of the way we consider the gestalt of college and career readiness at 12th grade and all the way through the system. So how do we lean into what it takes to be socially and emotionally well prepared by the time you're ready to make the transition? And then high school scheduling, Sophie did a great job of describing that no matter how much the high schools say they detrack, kids end up in herds based on course scheduling choices. And then once you're in that herd, it's really hard to break away. It's also hard to integrate. So those are some kind of obvious barriers. On the opportunity side, from Sean, let's look at rich models. Stephanie also sent us some information from Tennessee. What rich models like Posse Foundation and others can we emulate? From Gear Up, we heard that an 8th grade family survey, a lot of rich data there. Here's a point that kind of was a smack in the forehead, and that was when 8th grade family members talked about their kids being them talking to their kids about going to college as an expectation, the percentages are high. But when asked, has anybody talked to you, mom and dad, about sending your child to college, the responses dropped to 15%. So are we capturing 8th grade and earlier families and talking to them about that? Sean, I think it was Shauna mentioned demystifying the college going experience, and Samantha followed up with that as well in terms of demystifying financial aid processes, FAFSA and beyond, all of the stuff that go with that. How do you really break the code of the system? Several of us mentioned, Sean included, the power of messaging, even full on public relations. And we really liked that notion of post-secondary success teams at the high school level that would include current college students, near peers, folks from the kids from the community who are now in college, but come back and really say, you could do this in Lyon County too. You can do this in Jessamine. Here's what it took for me. So somebody, a real person to hang on to. And then I think a big theme for us was coherence, not just the pipeline coherence, but coherence in terms of marshaling resources at the federal level, from Pell to infrastructure grants to subsidies, all of that work. So how do we bring coherence to this in such a way and then message it so that access opens up? And Sean's PR campaign was, you can do this too. So what does that look like? Anybody else from group 2 that wants to chime in on something? I got so engaged I stopped taking good notes, but anything I missed that we want to make sure the other group hears about? All right, I'll yield to Dr. Thompson.
I'm going to let Amanda give you all the nuts and bolts. There's a couple points I want to say, though. We really dug deep into exactly identifying what really the barriers are in high school and how to move forward, and how post-secondary and high school, especially the senior year, can match up better in a very deliberate way to get us where we need to go. And it was great having a principal and a college president, university president in this meeting, because we had some real strong discussions along those lines. The one thing I would add to this, and I'll let Amanda jump in and tell the rest, is that we have to be deliberate in the way we think about this in a very strategic way. Example I gave is, why not to have these university and college presidents meeting with the feeder school principals and really coming in, superintendents, and coming up with a deliberate plan, a very proactive plan, way beyond anything we can do, Lou, at KBE, to push it, but at a very micro level, to build that community that they want to build to serve all of what they're trying to serve. Amanda, why don't you take us the rest of the way here?
Yeah, so this really is so complimentary of what you all talked about. We did talk about the need for advising earlier on, and the importance of really building the capacity of those, or utilizing those who are strongest in the state. We know that Zoom works clearly not all the time every day, but it is something that we have learned very quickly, that it is a resource for those who may live 6 hours apart, can access some of the best resources. And so we did talk about that around the advising. To Dr. Thompson's point, we did have a really good conversation, very similar to Lou's group, around really that near peer, that connection, and really having strong relationships, as Dr. Thompson mentioned, between the universities and the regional districts. Just to really provide that insight on affordability, to provide the insight on aligned dual credit. So it's not just random dual credit the students are taking, but it really is aligned to a pathway, or it's meaningful, that it guides students into preparing for that transition, what that looks like. And that's where we talked about folks who are from those communities who did pursue a post-secondary degree or whatever from those universities or the community colleges, to come back and work with the folks from their community in their high school. There was a discussion around the meaningful senior year. So, how do we rethink high school as far as it being meaningful and really preparing students, especially those seniors who tend to stop taking rigorous coursework after their junior year and lose momentum a lot of times their senior year, or as Barry had mentioned, they take a bunch of dual credit and then really don't do anything with it. But it really is an opportune time to really build those students up and prepare them for that transition. The other thing, when we talked about advising, Mary had brought up, and others, and forgive me, I know Dr. Jackson did as well, just around what students don't know. And Barry brought this up too. They know what they see in their community. There's some cultural acceptable things they can do, and there's an expectation sometimes to stay in the community, do what you see. And those jobs are definitely important, but that's where we even connected it to, excuse me, the partnership with post-secondary on what's really out there. What are you capable of doing? What is an opportunity? And as President Jackson brought up, they don't know the difference between cybersecurity and accounting, or, whatever the different roles are. They've heard of it, but they may not really know. And so I'm really tapping into their interests and passions and really exposing them to what they're capable of doing, and what's out there in the world, instead of just what they see. And a lot of times they see public servants, they see teachers, they see different roles within their own community, and often that's only acceptable. And so how do you really expose students to what's out there and their ability to achieve, to do lots of things? And Mary just shared that, some of her former college friends and colleagues have done all kinds of cool jobs, in the world, and they just don't even see themselves in those roles. And so we just talked about the importance of advising, talked about policy ask around funding some collaboration or supports that really get into those schools and meet with the superintendents and principals to really build that transition and really build a capacity of P12 folks of what happens after they cross the stage. And being a P12 person most of my career, I've learned a ton in less than a year of what I didn't know, and what I really wish I would have known. And I think all of us probably feel that way. You don't know what you don't know until you realize there's a lot of information out there and a lot of resources. So that kind of sums up in a very high level, but we had great discussion just around really being, as Dr. Thompson said, intentional and strategic, and really focusing in on those individual students, their cultural experiences, their what they value, what their families value, the belief systems that schools even instill, and whether they can or can't do something. And is their potential. And so we just really kind of talked about that. And Lou, I think it really complements what you all talked about as well. So
it does. And I want to riff on that last notion a minute, because I did fail to say this out loud, even though it was threaded across the barriers and opportunities. And that is that there are dramatic cultural differences from one side of Kentucky to the next. So this can't be about a one size fits all message, but how do we lean into what we know, what we really know, not what we know stereotypically, but what we really know about the needs of Appalachia in this process, as well as the needs of urban Jefferson County, and then suburban Central Kentucky, and then more rural parts of the state all the way around. So thinking that Kentucky is monolithic in this will absolutely not serve us well as we move forward. So
One other thing I'll throw in, we came up with some very practical ideas, like having a capstone in the senior year, like providing like post-secondary with some folk that would go out and really work deeply in the district, not to recruit necessarily for the campus, but really to educate, work with the high schools to educate early. We talked about the curricular complexity, the alignment with the dual credit. We talked about the college and careers folk that needs to be there beyond the AmeriCorps. Some of the items that we've identified are items that truly go to, yes, a budget ask, but it goes to deep impact and deep policy. Jumping on what Lou and Amanda was saying, that even within West Louisville, to assume that all the students in West Louisville are going to be motivated by the same thing is a little bit problematic, right? The idea that, and Mary gave, I think, some great examples of talking about, you know, working with her folk, exploring people that they're, you know, that could be a variety of everything, right? And the kids have never thought about it, or never had anyone talk to them about it even. So the idea, I hope we do this with this group, is to come up with the big conceptual framework, true enough, but we get down to some really nitty gritty, high impact policy ask that's going to have a direct effect in the short, mid, and long term of what we're trying to accomplish here. So that, you know, those who are on our group, anything else you want to add in case we missed something?
One thing I want to toss out that I heard, maybe not directly, but heard elements of in each group, was just thinking about how you actually integrate the advising into the school day, not as a separate and distinct thing, right? So that it's an entitlement for every student rather than just an extracurricular that they receive. And we've seen in a few places, I don't know that this would work statewide, but we have seen in a few places where there are, whether it's a 9th grade course or a 12th grade course, an actual course, right? A college and career advisement piece that centers something and it becomes something that all students go through, and there's a curriculum around it. There's a set of materials that they're shared. They have that exposure. Thinking about ways to actually operationalize that. Obviously the schedule is very difficult to make it happen, but it has happened in many large communities, rural communities as well. So that may be one of those sort of tangible recommendations of developing a module or a set of modules or a full curriculum for a course if a local community wants to offer that, and make that something that all students participate in, regardless of, you know, whether it's a 9th or 12th grade place.
And there's two things we're talking about here when you say that, Ryan. One is, by the way, we have evidence on this, as Sarah White and other people know with the work that I've done. A course early in the career of high school really helps a kid to succeed more in high school and focus on the college career, right? They're focused, they may not know what they want to do, but they're focused on saying they're going. A capstone experience, doesn't have to be a course, in high school in that senior year, really hones in on all those things that we've been pushing, from FAFSA to a variety of things that really let them to know how to navigate the process, which actually is one of the bigger areas of problems. We talk about dual credit and all that, but that only explains about 20% of what happens to that young person in college. Rest of it is the social, cultural, emotional elements that we need to somehow address if we're going to get where we need to go. So, I mean, there are, and the connections between that freshman course that you take, we call a life skills course maybe, right? How you study, how you do this, how you do that, you know, financial literacy to that degree, versus that capstone experience where it's really a strategic plan for college about what, you know, that career you want truly. You'll know by then. You may not know in the 7th, 8th, 9th grade, but we've got you thinking about it back then. To how to finance it, the best place to go, understand how majors connect with careers, understand how you, once again, pay for it all, to maneuver college, understand diversity, all those sorts of things that are super shocking to kids once they get in that first year. That's why you see so many kids by comparison drop out in the first year, not for academic reasons, only about, as Ryan can tell you, max of 20%, depends on where you're at, usually between 15 and 20, but it's all those other pieces. So somehow transitions have to be translated to this kind of thought process.
I just want to mention one thing from our experience here is, I guess it was 10 years ago, we started a huge push for dual credit and not AP. But you go to other districts, there's a big push for AP, not dual credit. And in my time as principal, the focus was my students they needed something tangible, that they knew they were getting grades that was going to get them a college credit versus studying all year long for a course and not passing an exam. Is the reason my push started with dual credit. And I think now students here can graduate with over 30 hours of dual credit. And that's huge with financial support. But on the flip side, do we always have, going back to what Bob mentioned, do we have all the students that really need to be in dual credit, or is it the ones that can afford the dual credit, even though it's at a lower rate? But on the flip side, there's still some stigma with that. AP is looked at as better than dual credit in some parts or some people that you talk to. So, and again, that most people can overcome those things, but I think that's, Lou mentioned that different parts of the state are different. And I think keeping in mind, some schools are going to offer more of the other, whether it be AP or dual credit. And is that affecting our rates of students going to college? And I know it is. But again, are we getting the right students there, and how can we pay for that, or how can they pay for it? So just throwing those ideas out.
Whether it's dual credit, AP, IB, whatever, this is what we know, they all matter. So it's, to me, it's not one or the other. What matters to me, though, are those who are taking it. Low income students of color are not getting them nearly at equitable levels. Just so happens, though, once they do get them, and that we've seen this as with AP and dual credit, once they get them, they actually have a higher success rate in college. So, you know, we've got to somehow work on making sure that we have a pipeline to those folks getting those. Now, I understand the individual preference, whether dual credit or, now I'm the guy that's ultimately in charge of kind of both of those in the end, and the end result of it. Dual credit should not be easier than AP or vice versa. Both are supposed to be equal in nature and in academic rigor. Now, we know that ends up not being the case, and we've got to address that because that's a quality statement. However, there is a practical element of dual credit if it's done it the right way, and I think that's what Barry's saying, that there is an end result almost immediate. And for younger people, immediate gratification matters, right? More than waiting and hoping. So somehow we've got to, Amanda and Jennifer and those who are now in charge of dual credit from this end, we've got to make quality a core element of this conversation too, as we align the curricular process from high school into college.
Just one note on Aaron, something you said about making sure that we're expanding access for students. I do think there is something to be said. I believe this pretty deeply, and I've seen it happen in a number of places. You got to start with the data early on. Waiting until 11th grade or 12th grade to figure out and talk to individual students is too late. And I think, you know, Kentucky has the data to be able to start doing more, using more of these predictive models that are certainly not meant to close doors, they're meant to open doors. But we've been doing some work with San Antonio, and they've taken and looked at, so generally they've focused on AP, generally for their AP potential score, they get sort of a yes, no, does the student have likelihood to succeed? Well, they have blown that up and said they have a 10% likelihood or 20, 30, 40, 50%. And essentially, if a student has more than a 10% likelihood, they're putting them into a course. They don't care. And they're putting wraparound supports around it. And that's also shifting the way in which they're selecting which courses to offer. So they saw that the students weren't being successful or weren't looking like they were going to be successful in AP Physics. And so they've switched and now are focusing on something else entirely. So doing that at an early stage allows them to plan for their master schedule about what's going to be offered and to prepare to get those students moving in that direction and begin to have those conversations with families and students about, we are going to put you in this course when you get to 11th or 12th grade, so expect it. And that has shot up. I think their rates in the last 10 years of, or not 10 years, 5 years, have gone up something over 200% growth in access and success among Latino students in that community. So great opportunity for maximizing data to be able to start better targeting students.
Ryan, I'm glad you brought that up. That's absolutely right. That's why we need to start in the 9th grade at least. Now I argue if we can start in 7th grade with our Gear Up as a good example of where we've done exactly what you're talking about with Gear Up. That's why we've been so successful with Gear Up. But you're right, it at least has to start in 9th grade. It'd be great to start in 7th grade. I mean, Bob Jackson, the folks out in Western Kentucky, although they're trying to be more targeted toward low-income students of color, they actually have a good model that they've worked with in far Western Kentucky. So you've seen the overall dual credit, doing really well in that neck of the woods. So Ryan, I really appreciate you bringing that to our attention because that is the nail on the head.
And I think I was supposed to close out the last few minutes here. We are already started touching upon some of the elements around that second bucket in the sort of application space, and I think in the connection space, and that really does get at making sure there's clarity around the financial aid aspects, better sense of college match and college fit, and the conversations that need to happen there and the capacity to support that. I think we were hoping to identify if there were additional programmatic type elements within Kentucky or otherwise that you guys wanted to learn more about or felt like would be important to bring as a highlight to the next conversation, so we can make sure that that's also grounded in the work that's already happening within Kentucky. So I just want to sort of open the floor for, we've already heard about some of the Gear Up activities, obviously, and maybe Sarah, we maybe could have you talk a little bit more next time about some of the way in which you guys structure your support and kind of where that's successful. May also want to talk a little bit about some of the summer bridge elements that are just now going to be funded and sort of what that's going to look like in trying to help students kind of make those connections into higher education. But other things that either questions or data around the application space that you are interested in and or particular programs or initiatives that it would be useful to learn more information about.
Would a better understanding of how the family and youth resource centers might fit or support transition efforts be useful?
I'd also like to hear, I feel like we were post-secondary, I mean, P12 heavy this time, appropriately so, but I would love to hear from some higher ed enrollment folks, first gen folks, and what kind of efforts they employ, strategical kinds of approaches that they take to reach into P12. So let's make sure we're thinking about both sides of the equation.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Young, because as we discussed some potential opportunities, I'm thinking that, I'm aware that some of our colleges are using strategies, but not in a consistent, well-organized way or structure.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've done this. I wasn't at the last meeting. Ryan, did we provide folk with the reasons why people drop out and why they succeed in college? Have we given them all that?
We haven't yet. I was thinking that was going to be a big topic of the third conversation, that sort of enrollment and persistence piece.
Yeah, please do. I mean, we have, and hopefully I can fill in around, for the last 25 years, I've collected a lot of data from around the country, both from community colleges and four-year institutions, both selective and non-selective institutions, about why people drop out in their first, second, third, and fourth year. So I can, Ryan, with that data, maybe I can fill in contextually with the research. We have hundreds of thousands of data points, and I've combined them down into a set of macro reasons and why and when. So with personal, academic, and so on, that we could talk about.
Sounds like you volunteered yourself to be the presenter.
Well, no, you are. You're going to bring the data. I'm just going to come in and look good and talk.
Going to pontificate, yeah. So this is a little nutsy boltsy, forgive me, and Amanda and Jennifer can tell me behind the scenes or tell you if we don't need to go here, but I know just enough to be dangerous, but there was just an ACT settlement with Kentucky, and part of that was that they were making data available on the required 11th grade test to post-secondary institutions, and I understand why that's a problem. Evidently, it happened for years. Now that that's all said and done, what is that going to mean for post-secondary institutions who are trying to reach kids, find kids, engage them in the recruitment and application process, and what are the plans for mitigating that hiccup?
I can give you an update from what I know so far, Lou. So you are correct. It did violate the contract with KDE to send out those names without permission because those students are minors at that time. And so what they were lacking was parent permission to share the data. As you can imagine, just as you said, the universities were devastated because that was their typical and traditional way of starting to reach out to students who already had passing scores or really high ACT scores. I know when we talked to Todd Allen, they acknowledged they didn't realize how significant that was for post-secondary. And so they did put the ball back in the court of ACT, saying, if you can come up with a way for students to either opt in or opt out of that option, but having to have something, we are open to that. We know how important this is to the post-secondary institutions and opportunities for students. From what I heard in the past 2 or 3 weeks, they have not responded, but ACT did, because of the agreement between them and KDE to resolve the issue. They did ask the universities to delete thousands of files from years past, which did not go well. As you can imagine, that's a huge lift, but we're hopeful that ACT will come up with an option. The other thing that we are starting to also talk about, Lou, and this is just very premature, but I think it fits in well, is that we're really starting to talk about with test optional, how do we reach students with GPA? How do we make them aware of opportunities and their worthiness of coming to school, that they can do it and they already qualified? Much to what Dr. Thompson has said, is there's a huge number of students who could already be admitted. So we are talking about different strategies with David Couch and using Infinite Campus to notify seniors by September 1 that they are eligible to apply to the public institutions in KCTCS, and that based on their GPA and their criteria, they would be admitted. And so the universities did really like that. Now, that would not give them direct access to the students' information, but it would, Infinite Campus reaches every child, every parent. I mean, you name it. It's the piece we all use in K-12 or P-12. And so there is discussion around how we do that, and the commitment of the universities of how they would provide a link that would make it very accessible, not a link just to their webpage, but really how to really make them want to go on and apply. So that is what we're talking about, but we have not heard specific to the ACT if they're going to do anything for that opt-in or opt-out, but we're really trying to work with KDE on solutions to improve that communication early on.
And let me be real clear. I want everybody to know where I am on this because it's only fair that I do this. I mean, when we have a bureaucratic process that sets up that ends up hurting a huge number, there's a problem there. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a contractual glitch that seriously has affected post-secondary tremendously from reaching out to students to have them go to college. And
really,
and our jobs, I'm sorry.
Jefferson County kids probably most hurt by it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And Eastern Kentucky kids even. I mean, so we're seeing this as a huge, I mean, this is a bureaucratic barrier, folks. Please understand, because under FERPA laws, believe me, no one knows FERPA laws as well as I do on this. Or I know it as well as many of you. I'll just say that. This does not violate FERPA. That's a misnomer because we have the right to know in those cases under FERPA law. The point being is, though, it was a contractual glitch. And in Kentucky, that's problematic. Those are the things I think we can fix. The other thing I'm telling our post-secondary campuses, there's no reason why we can't have directed admissions. I mean, if people have been, why not have on that senior transcript that if the kids' grades are, by the way, I can show you a correlation as Ryan and Lou and other people can, that whatever your senior grades are, you're going into your senior year, is probably not going to change a whole lot when you graduate. Not so dramatically that you'll be kicked off. We should be able to tell that student at that time, hey, guess what? You are at least very minimum, you've already been admitted to one of our KCTCS's campuses. If our four-year institutions want to opt into that, put it there. There's no reason why a kid should be not thinking that he or she is worthy of going to college. And when we talk to them, many feel like they're not worthy of going. So somehow we've got to cut down some of these really artificial barriers that, and you know, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Anyway, I can give you more of a speech, but I'll stop. Lou, I guess we're ending this, right? I'll let Lou have the last word here. A couple of points. I really appreciate everybody for coming. You know, the thing that I like about this is all of us are in this game together. This is no longer this separation between P12 and higher ed. This is not about pointing fingers. This is truly about saying, how then do we come together in a way that actually makes sense for Lou's words, that kiddo? You know, how do we think about that student first and not ourselves and how we're doing business? The piece I'll leave you on is that Amanda and Jennifer and their crew, they do an excellent job. I'm so glad to have them on board. I'm so glad we were able to change my office in such a way and take resources and devote to this and experience. I started to say experiment, it's not. It may be though, Ryan, we'll see, right? But one, I hope that becomes true. And I appreciate Ryan and ESG for being a part of this conversation. Lou, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, so lovely comments. Thanks to all those folks too. And then to all of you who are part of this work group. We appreciate your generous gift of time and talent to this. There is much wisdom in this room, and being able to mine that wisdom and to make big shifts in policy that are better for every kiddo in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. My students at high school used to fuss at me for calling them kiddos. That made me want to do it more. I'm just ornery that way. But if we can impact the lives of these young people and move them into post-secondary institutions where their outcomes will be better, it's good for them. It's good for all of us. And so we thank you for your generous gift of time.
Be careful, everybody.
Oh, I'm supposed to remind you that we're back together on, sorry, I had one job.
June 18th, right?
June 18th, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. We're looking forward to seeing you all.
Be there.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
See y'all.